Welcome to the Spirit of Business, episode number 53, When You Lose Your Creativity, with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum.
Hi Sarah.
Hi Matt.
This week I'd like us to have a bit of a chat around what happens when you lose creativity and momentum and motivation. I sort of personally noticed that, I did a lot of work last year in terms of making sure that I supported a lot of people in our organisation and got a lot of information out there, did lots of forums and podcasts with you and that sort of type thing. And I'm finding that I used to have this beautiful flow of creativity of thinking about what the next topic was going to be. And I really enjoyed that exercise of getting some sort of a feeling or a vision that came in or an idea. And I've noticed this year, it's almost like it's gone. There's this void there, that there's just not that same sort of spark or same sort of energy of feeling coming through and creativity. There's a sort of, you can talk about it in negative terms like flatness or something like that. But and we were just chatting about it before, and I just thought, well, we thought it was good thought process for a topic, and I sort of sometimes I feel very motivated and very creative about things, and then other times I don't. And I'm not alone, and I see this pattern in business owners as well. So I was probably using myself as an example of what other business owners feel in certain times where there's this nice sort of flow of creativity and there's this excitement, this momentum, and you don't have to try so hard. And at the moment, I feel like I have to try really hard to think about the next spark or the next idea. And so I'm sure that there's reasons for it that were discussed before, but maybe a good topic for today.
Yeah, everybody experiences that. I experience that as well, but maybe I think it's normal. And so I don't feel there's something wrong. I don't think, if I feel like that. If things feel a bit flat to me, I don't really think that there's something wrong with that. I feel like that's a contrast to when things feel very creative or very full or something. And so what I find is easier is to go with it. I don't put myself under pressure if I'm in that kind of situation. I'm not really lazy. I don't opt out of things because I find that doesn't work very well. I've tried that, just like, I don't feel like it, I won't do it. That doesn't work well for me. I haven't seen that working well for most people. There's a discipline, but what I've learned is to apply a very quiet kind of discipline. If everything's feeling really quiet or flat inside me, I let it be like that. I don't judge it. And so I'll come at a disciplined situation. I need to have an idea. I won't go looking for that buzz of an idea. I'll go very quiet with it. And usually I'll find something will just slip in that I would normally not even have noticed, but I let myself notice it. And I might feel like, that's not really exciting, or that's not really creative. But if I just go with it very gently, it turns into something. So for me, it's a different dynamic. It's one of the many dynamics of life, and it's a different one from that creative flow, but it's not a lesser one.
Which makes sense. And I suppose one of the things that I've personally felt too is around when you get into these spaces, you feel that you start to worry that this is the pattern that's going to form.
Forever and ever.
Forever and ever. And you start to future forecast, which I tell people not to do that all the time. I sometimes do it myself. And anyway, I think exercise was a classic for me in relation to that. We've spoken about that before, where you thought, well, if you stopped exercising in a vigorous way, then, you feel like you're going to, put on weight, or you'll feel like you'll go into this downward spiral. And the same with sort of motivation in business or creativity or working hard, because you think, once I lose it, I'm never going to get it back again. And when I'm not going to get it back again, that's when you start to worry about, well, what's the future going to turn up like if I'm worried about being lazy, or I don't care, or any of those sorts of things. So your mind starts to future forecast what you think is going to happen just because you're in this particular situation. And I see this many, many times with different people, and I'm great at sort of, you know, picking up other people and these sorts of things, and saying to them, hang on a minute, just hold on a little bit, and you know, this is pretty normal, like it, as you say, it is. But I suppose the reason why I'm saying is because it even happens to me, even though I can pick up other people on it. So how the mind can work, where it can trick you into these particular beliefs.
Oh, totally. Like recently, I've felt this just incredibly strong need to get away from the computer. If I just walk outside of the house and stand in the fresh air, it feels so comforting somehow. And like that's where I should be, not in front of the computer. But I have to be in front of the computer quite a lot of the time because I have commitments with the computer. And I exactly the same thing, and I can start to think, oh my goodness, you know, what's happening? Maybe like if I don't like being on the computer, and the mind will start to play the trick of what if this carries on, or is there something wrong? But I think there's something we need to talk about here that's very important that most people don't seem to me to understand very well, but it's made the most enormous difference to me to understand this. So we can talk about life is energy, and we have more understanding of that. Scientists now understand that life is energy, and if you missed that bit of science, it's pretty fundamental. So it wouldn't have been taught to you when you were at school, most likely, but it's still a very fundamental understanding scientifically now that life is made out of energy. The thing that I've learned, and this really came from working with Chinese masters more than anything else, plus my own observation, is that energy of life is constantly changing. And so that energy produces different weather, different circumstances. There's different feelings from day to day to day. So you can wake up one morning feeling great and another morning feeling really kind of tired, and nothing really is different about those 2 days. But in my world, we would say the energy's different. And the big thing that I've observed is that energy is always actually evolving. So at some level, it's advancing, and so we can't go back to how we were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. We will never be able to do that because we're constantly, a bit like software, being upgraded or up-leveled at a subtle level. Now, you know, somebody can listen to me and say, well, how do you know? Or I don't believe that. But I've been observing this for 30 years now, and I found that it works much better when I understand this than if I play with other versions. Now, the thing about that is that sometimes when we go through a period where there's some change going on, we think, oh, help, I've lost something or something's going wrong. But actually what's happening is it's rather like your hardware is being upgraded or your software is being upgraded. And you're not really familiar with what's coming. You're only familiar with what you've known in the past. So you go looking for what's familiar to you. So you try the same old things. You try the old routines, the old techniques, the old tips, whatever worked for you in the past, and it doesn't seem to work so well anymore. But you don't know what's new. You don't know what to look for. But what happens, and I see this with my clients all the time, they go through a period where they just don't feel so good, and I say it's okay, it's an upgrade, or I have different ways of saying the same thing, and after a little while they come bouncing back. It's like, oh yes, I feel completely different now. And when we understand that, what we realize is that we are evolving, we are upgrading, and that means we're going into new territory frequently, and it's unfamiliar. And I see that this year, for example, 2021, the energy is very, very different from the energy of last year. And it's much more steady. It doesn't have these like wild peaks and troughs that we saw. It's a very, very steady, almost boring kind of energy. The Chinese describe it as an ox energy, which is like really hard working, you know, pulling the plow type of energy. It's the kind of energy where hard work is rewarded, just, you know, sticking in there, doing it. But it's really different from the very volatile energy that we experienced last year. Now you might think, oh my goodness, what's happened? You know, I just feel so different. But this is not just about you, it's about how you combine with everything. And these are very real phenomena. This is not esoteric. This is really stuff that affects us every single day. And the reason I talk about it is because it helps us to take it all less personally. Because we tend to think, I feel different, there must be something wrong with me. Or I'm feeling great today, there must be something right with me. But we're part of a vast cosmos, actually, and we're part of that huge field of energy. And how I feel today is not all about me. It's very much about this little bit of it, which is me, connected with all of it, which is very, very, very large. And I found that it was very helpful to have some understanding of that things are changing constantly. The changes that are coming are always new, so they're really unfamiliar. And therefore, it helps to understand why being curious, open-minded, having a kind of exploratory approach to life is actually much more effective than trying to be a control freak, because it's really difficult to control something when you don't even know what it is.
A lot in what you just said then, and a couple of the points that I think it's worth highlighting is around this concept of really that it's not necessarily you. There's a lot of things at play that are outside of you, and I think when we're in business, especially, we think that really we're responsible for pretty much everything that goes on.
I am the center of the world, the universe, and the cosmos, and everything rests on my shoulders. Yeah,
exactly right. Because in a lot of regards, we are responsible for the health and well-being of the people that rely upon us.
No,
And
hold on a moment. We're not. We're not responsible for their health and well-being. They're responsible for their health and well-being.
Correct, and that's the point that we've learnt the wiring that we're there, not probably more financially, that we're there to support them rather than their health and well-being, and so therefore we have this concept that we can control everything, and therefore we can control ourselves, and when things are going well, then we might sort of take some comfort from that, and when things aren't going so well, we feel like there's things going wrong and we're at fault and we need to do something different. But to know that we're not solely responsible for everything of how we feel, I think provides a bit of comfort in that, because it's like, well, it's not always our fault, it's not always our doing. And I think that's where we beat ourselves up a fair bit, because we think that everything is to do with us and what we've done, and that's probably the first point that I wanted to make, that you sort of raised, that it's nice to know that it's just not us, and it's nice to know that we're all sort of in some regards feeling this particular thing. And then the other thing is this sense of our minds being such a tricky place to be, because we know that we've been in these situations before. We know that we've come out of them, yet we don't trust that we're going to come out of them again when we go into them. It's like, well, but hang on a minute, you were there, X period of time ago, and you felt that particular way, and you did come out of it, and so it's this mind trickery that goes on as well. So it's nice to have these conversations, because I find that there's some comfort in, because you go, oh, hang on a minute, that's kind of a little bit too inwardly focused, when it's really not about you in some regard. So I can really sense what you're talking about there. And the other thing I always feel when we talk like this is that sense of being kind to yourself. Is this, I forget to do that probably as much as most people do too, in terms of really looking after yourself and going, well, it's like, and going, like what you said before, going gently forward, as opposed to pushing. Because you naturally go back to default and you push, but you're pushing in the direction that you've been before, which is what you said, rather than a new direction that you haven't been to before, so you don't know necessarily where you're going to. So you can't push if you don't know where you're actually pushing to.
No, you can only be open to it and see what emerges or see what happens. And that brings us into a much more right relationship with life, because we don't control life, just as we don't control nature. We're a part of it. We're inside it, but we sometimes think as if we're outside it. But we're not. We're right inside it. We're part of this grand flow of movement, of energy, of happening. And it is much easier to understand, because we're not victims of it, but at the same time we're also not separate from it. So it's finding that right relationship where you can be at peace. To me, to be able to be at peace with where I am at the moment. Today my energy feels a bit flat. Tomorrow I'm full of energy. The next day I'm feeling something different again. The following day I'm something different again. But to be able to be present and at peace with all this range of feelings and experiences we have, to me, that gives us way more capability. There's a kind of self-mastery in it. And I spoke to someone the other day who's actually a very, very interesting guy, hugely knowledgeable about money and business. And he said to me, I might have mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. He said to me, the reason why most people who want to do good in the world, like purpose-led businesses, fail is because the people who are leading them don't have the equanimity to be able to succeed. And he was talking about, if you look at the people who are very, very successful at the level of pretty much controlling the world kind of thing, he said you can learn a lot from them. They have a certain mastery of themselves and of their emotions, because they wouldn't be able to do what they do if they didn't have that. But this is important stuff, because we can't get that kind of mastery by forcing things.
But just what you described in the polar opposites between somebody who wants to do good and is unable to implement, because they don't have that mastery, and then somebody who does have the mastery and potentially controls things not in a moral or ethical sort of type way potentially too. So that's where sort of this another balance comes in there, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, that's like money. You could look at wealthy people who are irresponsible with their money and say, I never want to be wealthy. Or you could look at it and say, well, I'd like to be wealthy and try to do a better job with it. We don't need to let other people's failures put us off. But yeah, I think that we can learn something from it, but maintain and build and grow our own sense of values. And then we're in the territory of character development, which I think is a really important thing.
So going back to what you were just saying about that gentleman, and what did you actually mean by that a bit further, about that equanimity that you were talking about there? What's that you were trying to, the point that you were making there?
It's about whatever's happening in your life, being able to respond to it with peace. Right. So if you freak out because the market's dropping, or you get really angry because a member of your team has just given in their notice, or you feel really hurt because of something that a client said to you, or whatever it is, all those kinds of things, that is not equanimity. That is what we can call reactivity. You're just very reactive to whatever's going on. Somebody showed me an email the other day and said, Sarah, look at this email. And he was practically ready to pull his hair out over it, because it was a salesperson being very picky about all the information he needed, contracts and precise details. And actually, I came back and said, this is a great email, because it's showing you what you need to do in order for this guy to be able to sell. But his take on it was, this guy's a pain in the ass because he's so demanding, and he wants this and he wants that. Why can't he just get on with the job? So it's that ability to be able to step back and say, this is happening to me. This is not something that's a mistake. Life hasn't made a mistake by making this happen to me. This is the right thing to be happening to me, even if I don't know why. How can I step back a little bit and have a look at it and find a way to respond to it that is empowering to me and is likely to produce a good outcome in the situation? Whereas if we say, oh, that guy, he's just such a pain, I'm just going to go and find somebody else, I'm not going to work with this guy anymore, probably all the investment that we've made in that guy is thrown away, and we have to start again with somebody else who may be a nice yes person, but they're not necessarily going to do a better job. So if we can have that self-mastery to be able to discern, is this the right person to be working with now or not? Is this the right decision, or is this the best decision I can make at the moment or not? So we're not making decisions out of reactivity or out of weakness or out of, oh, I don't know what to do. We're making decisions consciously, with wisdom, with a sense of what it is that we're creating, what we're making in this. You can see that if you do that every single day, if you build the habit of equanimity, which also means not getting overexcited, because when you get overexcited, you scatter your energy and you lose results so easily when you get overexcited. So then if you build that day after day after day after day, you can see a really solid character emerging and a solid life that feels like it's on a strong foundation and where you're not rocked by the circumstances.
The words that came up then for me were acceptance and perspective. So accepting the situation that you're currently finding yourself in, and saying, well, I am where I am. Okay, so I deal with it based on that principle, and then working out perspective on the situation to find a better way, as you say. So you use a great example then in terms of that particular salesperson, and then the methodology that you go through to help you decision make. And it's funny because I've found myself that's kind of what I do for every single decision that I make, and teach other people to do, is to say, okay, let's just break this down into things that are truth, and things that are assumptions and opinions and all the other things that go along with it, to then work out which is a better way to make a decision on something. So I think that the first step in that is acceptance that, okay, you might be feeling the way you do, but don't judge it, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, and there's something bigger at play here that you may not necessarily know. And I think that there's, as I said before, there's a bit of comfort in that, because you go, well, hang on a second, it is what it is. That's the acceptance aspect of it. What am I going to do to work with this to get a better way to move forward?
I went to the big warehouse, like do-it-yourself and everything warehouse yesterday, with my husband, who's been putting in a hot water tank, and it's been driving him crazy, absolutely crazy. And we went there and we couldn't find the parts, and he was swearing and so I look at it and I think, look, none of this is going to bring the parts onto the shelf. None of it. The other shops are already shut, so we can't go to the professional plumbing shop. It's too late. Like, why are you doing this? And I see this, it's funny, maybe often for women, it might not be really a gender thing, but sometimes it is. I see men get screamingly angry with things over which they actually have no control. And it's like, if they fail in something, it makes them look stupid, or I don't know what's going on exactly in their head. And I look at it and think, look, I mean, that is a case where it is what it is. I don't like that expression because people use it as an excuse, and it should not ever be used as an excuse. But if this is what's happened, this is what it is. How are we going to respond to this? Not, this should not have happened. My life shouldn't be like this. These things should be on the shelf when they're not. It's like, life should know that I was going to walk into this shop and I was going to need this piece. There's this anger that is very, very common in business as well, which behind it is there's a kind of entitlement, like, I should be being treated better here, or it should be different. There are so many shoulds in there, and they always sit behind that kind of emotion and reactivity. Whereas actually, even if it's a disaster, it's still what's happened, and you still need to be able to gather yourself to be able to figure out what to do instead.
I resonate with you about the concept of, I hate that, well, it is what it is, as an excuse. So I think the is what it is okay in itself, because it's acceptance. It's what you said next. It's how do you respond to that situation is probably the point, that's where the true test of an ability to move forward in a calm, non-reactive, peaceful way, as opposed to an angry, aggressive, upset, annoyed way, because you say, well, this is the situation. How am I going to respond to it? Am I going to respond to it in that way or that way? And not sure if it is a gender thing or whether it's just or not at the end of the day. But I definitely think that it's a response mechanism, and I don't know anyone that gets angry about something and feels good about it. So typically, if you can respond to it in a calm and comfortable manner, you're generally going to feel a lot better about it than if you get upset about it. So I love that acceptance, but then it's the way you respond to it is really the true essence of how you feel. And going back to the original point on the acceptance that some days you're going to wake up and you're going to feel flat, or some weeks you're going to wake up and you're going to feel flat, or you're going to lose that creativity, or you're going to lose that spark and the momentum and the enjoyment of the excitement of whatever you're doing, but not to engage with it. I think it to a level beyond, to say, well, that's just what happens at certain points in time, because there's an energy that goes on around us that is causing that, and you don't know how that's upgrading you, as you say. So I kind of like all that thought process.
And even better to say, okay, so this is not such a creative time, this is a quiet time. So how can I enjoy this quietness rather than be against it in some way? Or often when people describe having less motivation, actually it's just a time when things are a bit deeper and they're quieter, there's more stillness there. That's very good gestation time. It's very good for newer ideas to come that perhaps there isn't space for in the usual noisy creativity. But those kinds of things take time. It's also a time when change is often happening. It's a bit like winter, where everything appears to have stopped, but there's a lot going on beneath the surface that then bursts out in spring. And you need winter in those climates where winter is what happens. You need the winter just as much as you need the spring and the summer and the autumn.
I suppose the trick is knowing when to push and when not to push. As you said, you used the word flow before, and flow is a great sense of when to, when you flow. The flow might be a very slow, quiet flow that's, you feel like you're not really going very far, and then there's a rush where you feel like you're going a lot faster, or you're trying to create momentum where you're pushing faster. I think that's where we start to get confused, and that's where some of the guilt comes in, because you start to think about, well, I should be moving in a faster direction or flowing better or whatever it actually is, and that's what you were talking about before.
It's the should thing, it's the should that gets in the way. The thing that I find is most helpful for me is to say, well, I'm going to do the things that I know that I need to do, but I'm not going to try to override the way that I feel. So if I'm feeling a bit quieter today, and let's say I need to make a presentation or something, I'm going to allow that quietness to come through the presentation. I'm not going to try to turn myself into a different person. So I'm going to let the energy of the time work through me, but I'm not going to flake out. I'm not going to just opt out of things because I don't feel like it very much. There's an art in there clearly of balancing those two energies, because we definitely need both.
Well, I actually feel better from this conversation anyway, just in terms of that acceptance and knowing that there's something a bigger player than myself in some of these particular things. And it's a good reminder, because we've had these conversations before, and I know it doesn't necessarily mean that I always remember it, and so it's always a good reminder to have these conversations, and hopefully other people get the benefit of that too. And then as you know, that I always look for. Formula is not the right word, but it's sort of, well, what are the ways or the triggers or the things that you can do to allow you to move beyond that in a better way, as opposed to getting stuck in that sort of feeling. So it's been good.
Good. Well, thank you very much, and let's see what next week's going to bring us.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you for listening to The Spirit of Business with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum. We'll be back next week with another episode. You'll find the show notes with links and other useful information on our website, spiritofbusiness.live. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends.